It's the late 1870s. One of the most infamous outlaws of the American Wild West is Billy the Kid, a teenage killer who terrorizes New Mexico. His life of crime comes to an end when gunned down by his one-time friend, lawman Pat Garrett. This is the legend of the Kid. But closer analysis and new forensic evidence reveals his story is very different.
Somehow or other, this happened to this real person and made him into this absolutely unreal person.
So who is the real boy behind the legend? We open the mystery files on Billy the Kid. New Mexico, in southwestern America. It's the old frontier, and the tales of outlaw Billy the Kid portray him as one of its most ruthless characters. Bob Bosbell, aficionado in all things Wild West.
Popular legend said he killed 21 men, one for every year of his life. You know, he robbed banks, he robbed trains. He appeared on wanted posters, wanted Billy the Kid dead or alive. He stood in the street and he dared people to draw. Of course, that's not what happened, actually. In fact, his real name wasn't Billy. His real name was Henry McCarty.
Henry McCarty and Henry Antrim are his family names. William, or Billy Bonney, and the Kid are the aliases he now uses. Curator Elise Gomber has found that his names are not the only area of confusion.
Billy the Kid only killed 4 people that we know of for sure. There seem to be 2 divergent myths. In one, he's a romantic hero, a dashing outlaw, and in the other direction, he's a cold-blooded killer and a ruthless murderer.
In reality, much of his life is a mystery. Frederick Nolan is the world's leading expert on the Kid.
We don't know where he was born. We don't know who his father was. We don't know where he spent the first 12 years of his life.
But he becomes visible in the historical record when he is arrested for stealing some clothing off a laundry line aged about 15 in 1875.
We do know then that he got into trouble and that made him a drifter, and that's how he went to Lincoln County. But he's still nobody. He's just some kid on a horse with a gun who'll fight for money.
The Kid gets caught up in a bloody conflict in Lincoln, New Mexico, is ultimately branded an outlaw and murderer, and is sentenced to death. But the events leading up to his conviction are far from straightforward.
And the conflict is not about, am I right or am I wrong, or am I good or am I bad? The conflict is about money.
The Kid's actions in the war all stem from meeting one person, Englishman John Tunstall. Tunstall runs a store and a cattle ranch. He gives Billy a job in the winter of 1877. But there is a rival store in town. It belongs to the very successful partnership of Lawrence Murphy and Jimmy Dolan.
They'd had a monopoly for a decade, and pretty much everybody in the county was indebted to them.
Lincoln County is on the very frontier of the New World. The stakes are high. If a trader could monopolize the business, their wealth and power would grow as the region became more established. Lincoln County war expert Drew Gomber.
When John Tunstall arrived in Lincoln, he went into competition with the firm of Murphy and Dolan. He was the first real competition that they had ever seen, and they were not happy about this.
In the 1870s, the rules of the American frontier are dramatically different to Tunstall's English etiquette.
Lincoln County itself was about the same size as Ireland, and it had one sheriff.
And the one and only sheriff does not have Tunstall's interests at heart.
Murphy and Dolan more or less controlled Sheriff Brady.
Influenced by Dolan, Sheriff Brady raises a posse to arrest and remove Tunstall as a commercial threat.
And of course, the Englishmen, coming from a civilized Victorian society, probably never really dreamed that they would actually take steps to kill him. They tried to frighten him, but not kill, surely. I mean, after all, it's only shopping.
On the 18th of February, 1878, the posse guns John Tunstall down. It is the circumstances of Tunstall's killing that results in the kid becoming caught up in outlawry. To find out why, Drew Gomber investigates the site where Tunstall was gunned down.
Tunstall was coming from his ranch. He was coming down this way, and the killers were coming from the direction I just came. According to the Murphy-Dolan faction, Tunstall drew his own weapon and tried to resist arrest.
In the laws of the frontier, this justifies the posse shooting him. But Gomber disagrees with the posse's version of events.
We know better than this. This is certainly not what happened. Would not have been in keeping with Tunstall himself. In my opinion, John Tunstall's death was a clear-cut case of murder.
In Lincoln County, this is a new phenomenon.
There were random killings all the time in places like this, but there had been no murder where a man had been killed quite clearly who wasn't in a gunfight. The whole community felt very strongly that something had to be done.
With the sheriff loyal to the other side, Tunstall's men take matters into their own hands. The kid joins them, not as a ruthless gunslinger, but a young man of around 18, seeking vengeance for his employer's death.
It's a pretty tough country to survive in, let alone make a living in. This kid just said, this guy is the only person who ever treated me like a human being, so I'm gonna be on his side.
The gang becomes the regulators, their purpose to regulate justice on their boss's killers. And so, the Lincoln County War kicks off. It runs from February to July 1878, and is the setting for the kid's rise to fame and his downfall. Modern investigation shows his actions are very different in reality to his legend. The kid does not lead the regulators.
The kid was just one of the guys. You have to remember this. He's just a kid. He's a smart kid, and he's very good at staying alive. But he's not famous. Not at all. Not the slightest bit famous.
Though not the leader, he is also no hanger-on.
What's amazing about this story is Billy the Kid was hanging out with some very rough characters, and he was able to hold his own.
But the regulators are not outlaws at the start of the war. Given the circumstances of Tunstall's murder, they are given legal status and arrest warrants for his killers.
You know, you have a duly authorized sheriff's posse that kills Tunstall, and then the men that go after them are duly authorized constables.
So you've got basically two groups of lawmen fighting against each other. So how do you make an arrest?
One ambush would mark the most significant turning point in the kid's life. It is his part in the killing of Sheriff Brady nearly 2 months after Tunstall's death. Drew Gomber pieces together the actions of the regulators and the kid.
They spent the night in the Tunstall store. The next morning, they're in there having breakfast when one of them looked out the window and saw Sheriff Brady and 4 of his deputies marching down the street. Somebody had the less than brilliant idea of, hey, let's go shoot the sheriff. And they all rushed out back in high spirits. The The regulators had arrayed themselves behind a gate that was about in here. And by the time they got there, Sheriff Brady and his men were almost down to where the church is. Regulators opened fire in what has got to be the dumbest ambush of the Lincoln County War. Of the 4 deputies with Sheriff Brady, 2 of them weren't even hit. Brady, however, went down with somewhere between 9 and 16 bullets in his body. He was dead when he hit the ground.
The regulators have gone way beyond their original remit of arresting the men who killed Tunstall. Their legal status is revoked, and the war escalates into a final bloody shootout, where the regulators are surrounded and trapped in a burning house in Lincoln.
The 5-day battle was probably the worst and the most dramatic of all the skirmishes that took place.
It is during this battle the kid takes his first step to becoming the outlaw of legend.
Things were getting desperate, and it was at that point that the kid took command for the first time.
The kid gathers a diversion party to draw gunfire, enabling the others to try and escape.
Anybody ever tells you Billy was a coward doesn't know what they're talking about. Because he and his 4 volunteers came out the back door of the McSween house into a hailstorm of bullets. Experienced Army officers who were present that night estimated there were 2,000 rounds expended that night alone. But the gunfire was so heavy, they wound up cutting down the hillside, splashing across the river, and hiding in the trees on the other side.
The kid survives, but many of his comrades are dead. The war is effectively over. As outlaws and branded killers, the remaining regulators scatter. The kid is on the run. Despite the romantic image of Billy the Outlaw, he does not seem to want this life.
He tries to redeem himself, to try to get back, as it were, as a law-abiding citizen.
I think Billy wanted to go straight.
A chance presents itself when a new governor is appointed a few months after the end of the war.
The new governor, Lew Wallace, has just declared an amnesty for anybody that did anything in the Lincoln County War.
Investigations of evidence from a series of old letters, replicated here, reveal a secret deal made with Lew Wallace. A deal that meant the kid should have received a pardon for his crimes.
You've got a kid writing a letter to the governor of New Mexico saying, "Dear sir, I have heard that you will give $1,000 for my body. If I come and talk to you, I think I can persuade you that I can be of use to you if you will help me."
Far from being New Mexico's most wanted, the kid is only 14th on Wallace's hit list. Wallace needs to clean up New Mexico, so he accepts the offer of help from this small-time outlaw.
And Wallace said, or is reputed to have said, "If you do what you promise, I will set you free with a pardon in your pocket."
The deal is done. The kid submits to the court and testifies as a witness against the Murphy-Dolan gang. But it does not go according to the plan. Wallace has underestimated the politics of New Mexico.
I don't think he really knew the limits or the extent of his power. He told the district attorney not to prosecute Billy the Kid, and the district attorney said, "You can't tell me that. You're not part of the judicial system."
The pardon never appears. The kid is tried and convicted for the murder of Sheriff Brady and sentenced to death by hanging. No criminal charge ever sticks against anyone else in the gang conflict, on the Murphy-Dolan side or in the regulators. The kid is the only one.
I think Billy was the only person convicted after the Lincoln County War, partly because Billy was the only person who stayed in the area.
He thought it was hard that he was the only one that should suffer for that, which I agree with. However, he was guilty in the sense that he was part of the ones that were shooting.
Whether justified or not, the kid is faced with hanging.
I think after Billy realized that Wallace was never going to keep his part of the bargain, he was in a tight spot. It was either get out or hang.
The kid's escape in April 1881, around 2 years after his initial deal with Wallace, marks his first great step into celebrity.
Well, what he did was against all odds, he cheated the hangman, killed his 2 captors, and escaped. And that ended up in the New York Times, and that was world news. And that's the moment that the Billy the Kid that we know was born.
This bid for freedom lies at the heart of the kid's legend, and much of its myth comes from the account written by one of Brady's successors, Sheriff Pat Garrett.
Pat Garrett was a former buffalo hunter who'd come up here from Texas.
Garrett's relationship with the kid has been subject to much debate.
There's a persistent myth about Pat Garrett that Pat and Billy were very good friends. They probably knew each other, but I don't think they were very close.
Even though he was not present at the time of the escape, Garrett's written account became the accepted version of events. It says the kid is taken to the outhouse and breaks free on the way back. He runs ahead of his jailer, James Bell, gets up the stairs and into the armory, where he finds a gun. Bell has reached the bottom of the stairs, and Billy shoots him down. Bell makes it outside and dies. Garrett claims the kid dispatches his other jailer, Bob Ollinger, with a shotgun, and then holds the whole of Lincoln in terror as he makes his getaway. It is an extraordinary tale, and one that establishes his legend as a ruthless killer who gunned down 2 deputies in a clear-cut case of murder. But there is evidence to suggest that Garrett's account may be wrong.
I think Pat is absolutely twisting the myth to make Billy more ruthless than he actually was.
Based on forensic analysis in the very courthouse where the kid was held, Steve Cedarwall, former federal agent, believes that Bell's death is not a murder and Garrett is lying.
In Pat Garrett's account of the escape of Billy the Kid and the killing of Bell, he has Bell at the bottom of the steps.
Cedarwall, however, has discovered evidence that challenges this account. Building on information from contemporary reports, he investigates further using a forensic chemical called luminol. It glows blue on contact with certain substances. One of these is blood. It may even be able to detect dried blood that is over 100 years old. In the courthouse, these forensic tests found a positive result upstairs, and Cedarwall believes this is blood. With this new evidence, he thinks Bell was not shot at the bottom of the stairs, but at the top.
The kid turned with a gun and he pulled the hammer back and he points the gun at Bell. Bell's a few steps down, he lunges forward. He lunged, he grabbed the gun like this, which put it in line with his body. The kid, it startles him. He steps back and he falls. And when the kid falls, his muscles tighten up, the gun went off. Shot Bell right to left.
Cedarwall believes Bell is killed in self-defense, and he's not the only one who thinks so.
I think Billy and Bell struggled. I think Billy had to kill Bell because Bell would have killed Billy. And I think Billy was trying to escape with his life. I mean, he was facing a hanging, and I'd have done exactly the same thing.
The kid even expresses regret almost immediately afterwards.
And Billy said he felt bad about that. He said it was a case of had to, not want to.
However, the death of the other jailer, Bob Ollinger, is not quite so easily justified.
Kid runs to Garrett's office, picks up the shotgun. He then runs to this window, which is open. He had to have both the hammers back when he stuck it out the window.
Ollinger has been over at the Wortley Hotel nearby, but when he hears the gunshot that strikes Bell, he runs back to the courthouse.
He looks up, sees the kid just as he's shoving the shotgun out the window. The kid shot him, killed him.
I think Ollinger would have killed Billy, absolutely, if he'd had the opportunity. And I think it was an absolutely necessary killing.
So, Garrett's account of the murders appears to be flawed. The kid's actions are more those of a desperate man than premeditated, but still those of a killer. The kid's escape from town only adds to the mystery.
When Billy escaped from the courthouse in Lincoln, no one lifted a finger to stop him. Pat said it was because the town was held in terror of Billy the Kid, and I just don't think that's true. And I think that's because he had so many friends.
He spends an hour trying to get on a horse, and he says goodbye to everybody, and everybody's just kind of looking at him, and he spends an hour. That's truly amazing.
This apparent popularity, coupled with his last-ditch escape, creates a legend, that of Billy the Kid.
The drama was such that the local newspapers were full of it, of course, all surrounding territorial newspapers, which in turn were picked up by the national newspapers. So suddenly, this nobody became a somebody.
And contemporary comic books, dime novels, also seized on his legend.
The dime novelists took him over and wrote the most fantastic adventure stories about him. And suddenly, Billy the Kid became an entity in itself. It was almost like a brand.
Billy the Kid becomes big business. But the fact remains that the Kid is a legally convicted murderer. His death, by one method or another, is inevitable. In Fort Sumner, around 200 kilometers northeast of Lincoln, Pat Garrett hunts the Kid down exactly 11 weeks after his escape from jail. The Kid's death does not stop his myth from growing. If anything, dying young helps to perpetuate Billy's legendary status.
Somehow or other, this happened to this real person and made him into this absolutely unreal person.
Modern investigation confirms the true history of the Kid as a young man with a gun caught up in a gang war, reacting to the events around him.
It just didn't work out for him in the end, mostly because of the choices he made, and those choices were made by a man who was just barely a man. He really was a kid.
Billy the Kid. A killer, of that there is no doubt, but not the Wild West's most wanted.